The first thing I noticed wasn't the memo or the slide with its dizzying lattice of arrows. It was the way the word consolidation sat in the middle of the screen like a black hole, quietly swallowing everything that wasn't nailed down. Our new CEO, Colton Reeve, stood at the podium in a suit that cost more than my first oscilloscope, talking about synergies and optimization and how realigning intellectual property ownership would position Corvex Technologies for an ambitious public offering. Somewhere behind me, a chair squeaked. In front of me, someone's knee bounced like a metronome for panic. I took a breath, tasted espresso and cold air, and felt something old and familiar settle inside me. Calm, precise, almost clinical. Fear belongs to the unprepared. My name is Juliet Rowan, though everyone who ever tried to rush my code calls me Jules. I had been at Corvex long enough to watch 5 CEOs learn our acronyms and forget our names, long enough to make myself the quiet constant in a company that liked to pin its hopes on quarterly messiahs. I built things that stayed built. Years ago, in the margins of insomnia, I began shaping an AI-driven safety brain for industrial control, what the documentation calls the BOF feedback system. What I called privately, the thing that let me sleep again. It could sense when a machine was about to hurt someone and whisper, "Not today," into the circuitry. I had sketchbooks stained by diner coffee, receipts for sensors paid with my own card, a soldering iron scar on my left thumb. I also had a yellowed paper that mattered more than any of it. When Reeves' laser pointer skittered across the clause about all patents developed during employment or utilizing company resources, my fingers tightened around the mug, but my pulse didn't rise. Corporate speak is a cipher I've translated for a decade. The presentation said growth, the subtext said seizure. They would take the crown jewels and re-engrave the band. Around me, the engineering floor performed its sad choreography. The shrug of resignation from the veteran, the stunned blink of the new hire, the furious whisper that thinks it's quiet. I opened my phone under the table and sent 4 words to the only lawyer who ever made me feel like I wasn't crazy for planning 10 years ahead. Check paragraph 7. The reply arrived before Reeve got to the slide about cultural integration. Already on it. You're covered. Covered. The word carried the weight of a November afternoon in 2011 when I'd walked into HR with a pen and a spine. Fresh out of MIT, too young to be cynical, too old to be naive, I'd asked for a single adjustment to the standard employment agreement. Any patents, inventions, or intellectual property developed outside standard working hours, using personal equipment and resources without company facilities or proprietary information, remain the sole property of the employee. The HR manager laughed, kindly the way people laugh when they think your audacity is adorable. Planning to invent the next iPhone in your spare time? Something like that, I'd said. They signed. Why wouldn't they? I was a junior system engineer with a milk crate desk lamp and a habit of staying late. The clause didn't look like a lock then. It looks like a vault door now. Reeve finished to polite applause, the kind that sounds like people clapping through a window. He stepped down into a ring of department heads who already smelled like agreement. I waited, counted 3 breaths, and walked up with my coffee cup as if all I wanted was to compliment a slide deck. "Impressive presentation," I said. "Juliet, right?" His smile was taught from practice. "I've heard about your work. The BOF feedback system is, frankly, it's the kind of innovation we need to showcase." "It is innovative," I agreed. "Took years to perfect." "Well, it's going to take Corvex to the next level. You should be proud. Your work will be part of something much bigger now." "Oh, I'm certain it will be part of something bigger," I said, and enjoyed the half-second before his eyes narrowed the way a man's do when the dog he assumed was friendly bares a tooth. He didn't ask what I meant. CEOs rarely ask when they think they already know. Back at my desk, I opened the bottom drawer and felt paper, the way some people feel rosary beads, for memory, for courage, for proof. The 2011 agreement didn't glow or hum. It lay flat and harmless-looking, like a sleeping snake. Section 7, subsection C. My lawyer, Ella, had once called it a golden ticket. It didn't feel golden so much as earned. I ran a finger down the clause and let the past unspool. The 2 a.m. oscillations, the garage that smelled like hot plastic in winter, the way the apartment radiator clanged like a bad metronome while I trained the model to recognize the sound of trouble before trouble had a sound. Work that lived outside Corvex's walls because it had to, because some things you build are yours before anyone else believes they're worth anything. People who haven't spent nights alone with code think the work happens in hours that can be boxed and billed. It doesn't. It happens when your brain is too tired to lie to you, when you draw a loop on a napkin and realize it is not a loop at all, but a gate. Edison had his lab books. Hedy Lamarr sketched frequency hopping on a cocktail napkin. The Homebrew Computer Club photocopied schematics in rented rooms. Inventions often begin in places corporations don't log. What companies log is possession. I pulled up my personal laptop, the one that has never known the Corvex network, and opened the ledger I kept like a pilgrim keeps a journal. Commit hashes with third-party timestamps, photos of breadboards on my kitchen table, me in a hoodie squinting at a terminal at 3:47 a.m., a receipt for a load cell that cost more than a week's rent, the Murphy's Diner tab where the waitress named B always circled decaf with a question mark and I always wrote no. A mess if you don't know what you're looking at. A map if you do. Ella had once tilted her head at the chaos and said, admiring and a little amused, "You've been building an alibi for 5 years." I told her I was building a record. She said they were the same thing when men in suits arrived with pens. I didn't intend to attack. The most effective ambush is the one you don't spring. It is the force you keep in reserve while your opponent walks into his own trap. I would wait. They would formalize the consolidation with the arrogance of people who believe all contracts are the same. They would ask for my signature, but the request would have the shape of a command. And then I would show them the paper they never read. On my screen, the BOF feedback systems architecture blinked into view, a cathedral in ASCII. It had secrets, not malicious ones, but boundaries, a handshake protocol that verified a license before it let anyone lay a hand on a machine that could kill a human if a sensor blinked wrong. I had written it because safety is a covenant, and covenants require signatures. Licensing, too, is a covenant. If you break it, nothing inside the covenant owes you anything. I texted Ella a time to talk and added, almost as a joke, "Bring Chinese." She answered with a thumbs up and a line that made me smile. "We'll build the paper wall so high they get a nosebleed at the top." By dusk, my office hum had cooled from panic to sullen acceptance. Engineers returned to their terminals with the careful deliberation of people who know not to speak near microphones. I packed a folder with the employment agreement and my development journal and left through the side door that sticks in summer. Outside, the city exhaled. Neon on wet pavement is the closest thing a modern street has to stained glass. I walked past Corvex's illuminated logo and thought of all the clever hands inside, how many of them had built miracles on nights no one paid for. There is a story companies tell about innovation, that it is summoned by perks and slogans and a campus with good coffee. The truer story is smaller and lonelier. It happens at 2:17 a.m., when the world is quiet enough to hear a machine learn. Murphy's was crowded, but B found me a corner and set down a mug so strong my eyes watered and said, "The usual?" I nodded. I opened the folder. The clause still looked like a joke someone told at my expense that I had decided to take seriously. Maybe that's all foresight is, refusing to laugh when everyone else does. My phone buzzed. "Ella, on my way, got sesame noodles and a notary stamp." I looked up at the TV over the counter. The news ticker burbled about markets and a supply chain hiccup at a steel plant in Ohio caused by a safety recalibration. I smiled without meaning to. Tomorrow I would begin building the fortress, notarizations, transfers, a company with my name on the door. Tonight I did what I always do when the future leans forward like a wave about to break. I flipped to a blank page in the notebook and wrote a sentence that steadied my hand. They will try to take this. Be ready. Outside, a delivery truck rattled past like a steel drum. Inside, I drew a little square where the clause sat in the contract, and around it I drew a wall, not to trap anything, but to mark where the world stops and mine begins. The apartment didn't look like much to strangers. Second-hand couch, books stacked on the floor, a cat that always chose the warmest pile of papers to sleep on. But to me, it was a war room. Every surface soon disappeared beneath a tide of documents, receipts, journals, photographs. If Reeve thought a PowerPoint slide and a few signatures could erase 5 years of sleepless nights, then he had never met an engineer who recorded everything out of habit and paranoia. I started with the notebooks. They smelled faintly of coffee and solder, each page dated in the corner. Some were scrawled in half-legible loops, others more precise. You could see the pattern of exhaustion in the handwriting, but also the trail of progress. Algorithms that grew cleaner, diagrams that resolved from chaos to symmetry. One page had a coffee stain shaped like the state of Ohio. Another, a doodle of my cat pawing at a circuit board. These weren't corporate design documents. They were the fingerprints of creation, impossible to fake. Then the receipts. Radio Shack, Amazon, DigiKey, Micro Center. A catalog of tiny purchases, resistors, capacitors, wire spools, specialized sensors, each with my name, my credit card, my address. Ella once joked that I could reconstruct my life story through what I bought at midnight. She wasn't wrong, and in patent law, that trail was gold. The photos came next, blurry shots of breadboards on my kitchen table, the glow of a monitor in a garage, half lit by a single bulb, prototype rigs cobbled together with duct tape. I had selfies too, taken not for vanity but proof, me in pajamas, hair tied back, holding up the day's failed assembly with a timestamp glowing in the corner of the screen. Proof that the BOF feedback system had been born in spaces no Corvex manager ever visited. But the crown jewel of the evidence was the code base, 23 versions, each hash-stamped on a blockchain service I'd subscribed to in 2018. At the time, friends had teased me for wasting money. What are you guarding against? Aliens stealing your neural net? Now I smiled at my own paranoia. Every commit was a stone in the fortress. Immutable, dated, signed. No corporate lawyer could argue with mathematics. Ella arrived at 9 with cartons of sesame noodles and a box full of legal pads. She looked around at the chaos and shook her head. You weren't kidding. This is overwhelming. It has to be airtight, I said. They'll come after me with everything they've got. She perched on the arm of the couch, flipping through a notebook. You realize most engineers never think this far ahead. They trust the company. They assume fairness. I almost laughed. Fairness is a bedtime story corporations tell their interns. Together we spread the evidence across the table. Ella began drafting formal transfer papers, moving the patent into Rowan Logic LLC, a company I'd quietly incorporated the week before. The name felt strange on paper, like a suet I wasn't sure I fit yet. But it was real. With each notarized document and each stamped signature, the wall grew higher. By midnight, we'd built what she called an impenetrable legal fortress. I called it survival. We filed incorporation papers, backdated transfers, and drew up cease and desist templates that could be deployed at a moment's notice. Every contingency had a folder. Every folder had a label. Every label was a shield. Still, between the signatures and the caffeine, there was space for silence. Ella leaned back, eyes half closed. You know, this is history repeating itself. Tesla built miracles and died broke because Edison claimed the spotlight. Philo Farnsworth invented television, but RCA nearly buried him in lawsuits until he was forgotten. You're rewriting that story. Her words lingered. I thought of Tesla in his dark hotel room, of Farnsworth defending his patent before Congress, of the thousands of nameless engineers whose ideas were eaten alive by corporations. Maybe paranoia wasn't paranoia. Maybe it was memory carried forward. At 2 a.m, I stood in the kitchen, pouring another cup of coffee. My cat meowed at my feet, demanding attention. I looked at her, then at the wall of papers that told my story in receipts and scribbles. And I felt something I hadn't let myself feel in years, vindication. I wasn't just protecting an invention. I was protecting the hours of my life that had gone into it, the person I had been when I made it. Ella yawned, stretching. So, what's next? Nothing, I said. We wait. Because the beauty of a trap is not in its spring. It's in the silence before, when the other side doesn't know they've already lost. By dawn, the fortress stood complete. Rowan Logic owned the BOF feedback system, legally and indisputably. My evidence was cataloged, cross-referenced, and locked behind passwords. If Reeve wanted to make his move, let him. Every step he took would only lead him closer to the clause he had ignored, to the vault he couldn't breach, to the wall he would smash against with all the arrogance of men who never believed engineers could fight back. The sun rose, staining the blinds gold. I closed the folder, exhaled slowly, and whispered to the empty room, "Your move, Colton." The summons came disguised as courtesy. An email from HR, polite but clipped, requesting my presence at a review session with senior leadership. Time, 2 p.m. Location, conference room A. Top floor, glass walls, mahogany table. I'd seen enough boardroom theater to know the choreography. 3 against 1. They'd bring in a lawyer with a predatory smile, HR to soften the edges, and Reeve himself at the head like a king conducting judgment. I walked in on the dot. The room smelled faintly of leather polish and nerves. Reeve sat at the center, perfectly posed in his $1,000 armor, flanked by Helen Marsh from HR and a man whose suit looked hand-stitched and expensive. Matthews, according to the silver card he slid across the table. Legal counsel. Juliet, Reeve said, smiling like we were old friends. Thanks for joining us. The folder appeared as if by magic, slid across the table like a chess piece. This is a standard formality, Reeve explained, voice smooth as silk. We're finalizing intellectual property consolidation. Just clarifying that all patents developed during your employment belong to Corvex Technologies and its parent company, Executive Holdings, LLC. I opened the folder slowly, flipping pages with deliberate care. Paragraph 3 carried the dagger, all intellectual property, whether developed during business hours or personal time, utilizing any knowledge gained through employment, shall be assigned to Executive Holdings. Comprehensive, they called it. Standard stuff, Matthews interjected, as if the weight of precedent alone should flatten me. Same agreement all senior engineers are signing, just confirms what's already in your contract. I let silence pool for a moment before answering. Actually, it doesn't. Reeve's smile faltered. Helen shuffled papers like a magician fumbling the trick. Matthews leaned forward, rehearsed confidence beginning to crack. What do you mean? Reeve asked, his voice a shade tighter. This document assumes my employment contract contains standard IP assignment clauses, I said, tapping the table. It doesn't. I was hired in 2011. Different template, different terms. Matthews blinked, then recovered. Even so, work-for-hire doctrine clearly states that work performed during employment using company resources belongs to the company. Key words, I replied evenly. during employment, company resources. The BOF feedback system was developed off hours with my equipment in my garage. None of this, I gestured to the glass walls, the polished table, was involved. Reeves' face shifted, confident to confused, confused to furious, and then back to that brittle smile. That's a technicality. No, I said, calm as frost. That's the law. The room chilled. I reached for my phone on the table, screen dark, but recording app silently blinking. One message sent to Ella would be enough. She was waiting with the cease and desist letters. Reeve tried a softer tactic. Let's be reasonable here, Jules. You've been well compensated. Salary, bonuses, stock options. You're a valued member of this team. Why not sign the agreement and avoid unnecessary complications? I almost laughed. Complications like assigning my patent to your holding company? Helen's voice wavered. Juliet, surely you don't mean to, but I cut her off. Do you remember the 2019 implementation meeting? The one where the engineering team integrated my system? You stood in the back, Helen. You heard the words. Everyone did. I said, I'm letting you use my baby. People laughed. No one corrected me. Because they knew. Matthews was typing furiously, hunting for precedents that didn't exist. Reeves' mask slipped entirely now, his eyes sharp with calculation. What do you want? He asked. Nothing, I said, standing. My lawyer will be in touch. Consider this. I tapped the unsigned document, returned to sender. At the door, I paused, looking back. By the way, Colton, those contracts with your major partners? You might want to reread Section 12.34, the part about valid patent ownership, termination on breach. The color drained from Helen's face. Matthews looked like he'd swallowed glass. Reeves said nothing, jaw tight, hands gripping the table hard enough to whiten his knuckles. I left them in silence, the kind that follows a gunshot before anyone realizes where the bullet landed. Outside, the engineering floor buzzed with nervous energy. My colleagues looked up as I walked past, their eyes asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. But I saw something shift. A glimmer of hope, or maybe defiance, flickering behind their exhaustion. Back at my office, I dialed Ella. She picked up before the first ring. Well? They made their move, I said, and they lost. I closed my office door, sat at my desk, and looked out over the cubicles. Reeve thought he'd walked me into a trap. What he didn't realize was that the walls were mine, the floor was mine, the locks were mine. He had walked willingly into a game I'd been playing since 2011. And now, the real storm was about to begin. By the time Ella arrived at Corvex's headquarters the next morning, the boardroom already smelled of fear. She didn't dress like their lawyers, no muted navy or polished cufflinks. She wore confidence the way other people wore armor, setting her briefcase on the mahogany table with deliberate precision. The room was crowded. Reeve at the head, Helen beside him, Matthews pale from lack of sleep, and at least half a dozen others who had spent the night sifting through old contracts like archaeologists uncovering a tomb. They looked exhausted, but exhaustion doesn't excuse arrogance. Ladies and gentlemen, Ella began, voice crisp as glass breaking, I represent Rowan Logic, LLC and its proprietor, Ms. Juliet Rowan, in the matter of patent US 108479293, the BOF feedback control system currently integrated across your industrial platforms. Matthews tried to cut in. We've reviewed Ms. Rowan's employment contract. While unusual, her clause doesn't erase the fact that her system is embedded in Corvex's infrastructure. That integration constitutes company ownership. Correction, Ella said smoothly, dropping a stack of documents onto the table. It constitutes a licensing agreement. A courtesy, really. My client allowed Corvex to use her technology because she believed in the company's mission. That courtesy ends today. The papers landed in front of Reeve. Termination of licensing rights, cease and desist orders, notarized patent documents with Juliet's name stamped in bold. "This is extortion," Reeves snapped, but even his anger sounded hollow. "This is property law," Ella countered, "and your own contracts prove it. Section 12.3.4, requirement for valid licensing. Breach results in immediate termination. You have 47 hours to respond before Rowan Logic enforces its rights." The silence that followed was punctured only by the furious tapping of keyboards. Someone was already calculating damages, someone else drafting emergency statements. Helen's face drained of color as she skimmed the termination clause. She knew what it meant. 17 contracts, worth millions, now dangling over a cliff. I wasn't in the room. I watched from my apartment, Ella streaming the performance to my phone, but I could feel the panic like static in the air. Outside those glass walls, the world was already catching on. Twitter had latched onto the story with a hunger reserved for corporate scandals. Patentgate trended within hours, fueled by whispers from inside the engineering floor. Someone posted a blurry photo of the boardroom, captioned, "When you realize your golden goose wasn't yours to begin with." Memes multiplied. One showed Reeves' face on the Titanic, iceberg labeled Paragraph 7. Investors started calling before lunch. Ella texted me updates. Stock down 12% in pre-market trading. Bloomberg sniffing around. SEC might get involved. I scrolled through headlines with a grim satisfaction. Corvex's crown jewel patent in dispute. New CEO faces IP theft allegations. Could a single clause sink a billion-dollar IPO? Back at Corvex, chaos rippled outward. Engineers whispered in Slack channels. Some gloating, some terrified. One message screenshot landed in my inbox. Jules wasn't paranoid. She was prepared. Others posted messages of solidarity. A few even thanked me for doing what they never could. Meanwhile, the clients had begun to stir. Fort Dynamics called the board, demanding answers. Aegis Manufacturing threatened to suspend payments until licensing was clarified. Steelbridge Industries hinted at litigation. Each call added weight to the collapsing structure, bricks tumbling faster than anyone in that boardroom could stack them back. I sat at my kitchen table, coffee cooling beside me, watching a company unravel in real time. It wasn't joy I felt, though satisfaction curled quietly in my chest. It was inevitability. For years I had prepared for this moment, layering proof on proof like bricks in a wall. And now, with a single deadline, that wall had become their prison. Ella's voice buzzed through the stream, calm, almost bored, as though she'd given this speech 100 times before. "You have 47 hours. After that, my client will deactivate every unauthorized installation of her system. You'll need to explain to your clients why their safety systems went dark." "Deactivate?" Matthews stammered. "You can't—" "Oh, but she can," Ella interrupted. "Authentication protocols built into the architecture. Every system checks for a valid license. No license, no functionality. Perfectly legal. Documented in the technical notes your engineers never bothered to read." Reeves' face hardened, all his smooth charm stripped away. For the first time, he looked like what he truly was, a man who had mistaken confidence for invincibility. Ella closed her briefcase with a click that sounded louder than any gavel. 47 hours, she repeated, then walked out, heels striking the tile like a metronome counting down the seconds. In my apartment, I closed the live stream. The city outside moved on, unaware that inside one tower an empire was already burning from the inside out. The trap had been sprung. All I had to do now was wait for the fire to spread. The first deadline hour arrived like a storm front. 47 hours. That's what Ella had given them. Long enough for panic to ripple through every corridor of Corvex, short enough that no committee could build a lifeboat in time. I sat in my apartment, blinds half drawn, watching the authentication dashboard glow across my laptop screen. 17 installations stretched over 3 continents, each one lit with a green check mark. Each one alive because I allowed it. All it would take was a single command, one string of characters I'd memorized like scripture, and those lights would turn red. Corvex tried bargaining first. Matthews sent an email marked Urgent Confidential. Mr. Reeve is prepared to offer you $2 million for full patent assignment. I forwarded it to Ella with 2 words, not interested. Minutes later came another, $5 million, then 10, plus a board seat. My response was as sharp as a blade. There is no price. Triple market rate, annual licensing, non-transferable, and Reeves' name removed. Non-negotiable. Inside Corvex, desperation was mounting. Former colleagues texted me quietly from the engineering floor. The repositories locked down, Reeve pacing like a caged animal, lawyers whispering into their phones. They know they're cornered, one wrote. Another sent a photo of a whiteboard scrawled with half-baked workaround ideas. None would work. The BOF system was built like a vault. Only my keys fit. The outside world began to smell blood. Tech blogs ran headlines. Patent gate worsens. Corvex could lose crown jewel IP. Investors fled. Clients called me directly, bypassing Corvex altogether. David Park from Fort Dynamics was blunt. We run a $40 million facility on your system. Tell me straight, does Corvex own it? I let silence hang, then replied, not anymore. By Friday evening, the city itself seemed to pulse with anticipation. Twitter was a battlefield. Memes painted Reeve as Icarus, flying too close to a sun shaped like paragraph 7. Anonymous engineers leaked snippets of internal Slack chats, employees cheering for the underdog. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just about me. It had become a spectacle, a parable of arrogance punished. Saturday morning, 6 a.m., 1 minute before deadline. I hovered over the keyboard, the command ready. Ella sat across from me, phone in hand, her eyes steady. 5:59 a.m. The phone rang. Matthews again, voice ragged with exhaustion. Ms. Rowan, we accept your terms. Too late. At 6 sharp, my finger tapped enter. The dashboard bloomed red. One by one, 17 installations across the globe failed authentication. Fort Dynamics, offline. Aegis Manufacturing, offline. Steelbridge, offline. Screens froze mid-process. Alarms triggered in factories. Operators cursed into dead headsets. Photos flooded social media within minutes. Conveyors halted, welders idled, red warning lights painting whole shop floors like emergency beacons. Chaos had a sound, and it was the silence of machines that no longer obeyed. Inside Corvex, the fallout was immediate. Emergency board meetings erupted. Clients screamed down phones, threatening lawsuits. By mid-morning, stock had plummeted 18%. And by noon, word leaked that the board had convened an unscheduled vote of no confidence in their shining new CEO. At 2:30 p.m., I got the message I'd been waiting for. Reeve escorted out of building by security. I didn't gloat. Instead, I poured coffee into the same chipped mug I'd used in 2011, back when this system was nothing but sketches on napkins. The taste was bitter, grounding. Reeve's empire had collapsed. Not because I fought harder, but because he assumed I wouldn't fight at all. By evening, Corvex wired the first annual licensing fee, $8.4 million. Confirmation followed that every trace of Reeves' name had been stripped from documentation. It was as if he had never existed. Through my window, their glass tower still gleamed in the sunset. But everyone inside now knew the truth. One clause, written 12 years ago, had brought them to their knees, and I was just getting started. The following Monday, the city skyline looked unchanged, but everything beneath it had shifted. Corvex's tower still gleamed with mirrored glass, yet its aura of invincibility had cracked. People streamed in and out of the revolving doors with the hollow-eyed urgency of survivors patching leaks in a sinking ship. Inside my own office, Rowan Logic's first headquarters 1 block away, I watched from a window, coffee steaming in my hand. The authentication dashboard beside me glowed a serene green again. All 17 installations restored, all humming under my license, not theirs. Ella leaned against the doorframe, scrolling through her phone. "Wire transfer cleared," she said. $8.4 million, first year of licensing secured. I nodded. Money mattered, but not nearly as much as the name. And Reeve? Gone. The board voted him out. Security escorted him to the curb. No severance package. She smiled thinly. His name has been erased from every patent, every presentation slide, every investor pitch. It's as if he never touched your system. I set my mug down and allowed myself a long breath. Vindication doesn't roar. It exhales. But the victory was bigger than me. Already, venture capital firms who had ignored my emails for years now sent eager messages. A Japanese consortium requested licensing terms. Sterling Technologies, the same investor Reeve had tried to dazzle with stolen credit, emailed an apology and a request for partnership. The predators had smelled blood, but discovered the prey had teeth. Still, beneath the triumph was something quieter, a reflection. What if Reeve had asked instead of taken? If he had walked into that boardroom and offered a fair contract, acknowledging my ownership, I would have agreed. I would have celebrated Corvex as my first major partner. But arrogance doesn't negotiate, it assumes. And assumptions are expensive. On Wednesday afternoon, Ella placed a final box on my desk. Inside were the last legal confirmations, notarized and sealed. "Their board chair sent you a note," she said, almost wry. An apology without admitting guilt, the usual. I read it once, fed it to the shredder, and listened to the machine grind the paper into ribbons. "They tried to take," I said softly. "They failed." That night I returned to my apartment, the same place where the system had been born in sleepless hours, and pulled out the old notebook. Coffee stains blurred some pages, ink smeared by exhaustion. Near the middle, dated 5 years ago, a line jumped out in shaky handwriting. "They'll try to take this someday. Be ready." I smiled. That younger version of me hadn't known the details, only the truth. The corporate world doesn't reward innovation, it consumes it. But I had been careful, meticulous, paranoid enough to leave a breadcrumb trail no one could erase. My phone buzzed. A message from Sarah Martinez, my old team lead. "Drinks tonight. The engineers want to celebrate your win." I hesitated, then replied, "Another time." This wasn't about victory parades. It was about survival and about the work ahead. I poured cheap coffee into the same chipped mug, sat at my kitchen table, and sketched a new design. The hum of the city outside mixed with the scratch of my pen. Innovation doesn't stop when one battle ends. It begins again in the quiet, in the hours no one is watching. On the second monitor, the dashboard glowed steadily. 17 green lights, 17 contracts, each one bearing my name. All because of a single paragraph added to a contract in 2011. Paragraph 7, dismissed as trivial, laughed off as unnecessary, had become the fortress that toppled a CEO and rewrote an industry cautionary tale. Somewhere in another boardroom, lawyers were already revising employment templates, closing the loophole I had walked through. Let them. I was already beyond it, sketching the next idea, the next safeguard, the next story they would try, and fail, to steal. I raised my mug in a silent toast, not to victory, but to foresight. To the paranoia that wasn't paranoia after all, to the engineer who, 12 years ago, had trusted herself more than the company. Because in the end, innovation isn't just invention, it's protection. And I had proved that one small clause could bring an empire to its knees. The city lights flickered on, and I kept writing.